They thought they were just unlocking a storage unit. Instead, they opened a vault that had been frozen in time. Years after Paul Walker's tragic 2013 crash, the doors to a quiet industrial garage in California were finally rolled up. No cameras, no Hollywood lights, just family, paperwork, and a long list of vehicles to inventory. But what waited inside wasn't just a collection of expensive cars. It was something far more personal. Row after row of rare machines sat under dust covers, some worth six figures, some nearly impossible to legally drive in the US. Others halfway torn apart as if their owner had planned to come back the next morning and finish the job. But the real shock wasn't the horsepower. It was the handwritten notes, the unfinished builds, the quiet plans no one knew about. And the deeper they looked, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a garage. It was Paul's private world. The building didn't look like it belonged to a Hollywood star. It sat in an ordinary industrial park in Valencia, California. Plain walls, no signs, no security guards posing for photos. If you drove past it, you'd never guess that inside was one of the most jaw-dropping private car collections tied to Paul Walker. When the doors finally rolled open after his 2013 passing, the first thing people noticed wasn't luxury. It was silence. Rows of cars stretched across the warehouse floor. More than 30 performance machines packed tightly together, some under soft covers, others exposed, paint still gleaming beneath a thin layer of dust. The air carried that unmistakable mix of rubber, oil, and cold metal. This wasn't a polished showroom built to impress guests. It was a working garage. There were tool chests against the walls, loose parts stacked carefully on shelves, workbenches with notes scribbled on scraps of paper. A few cars sat slightly elevated as if someone had been in the middle of inspecting suspension or brakes. It felt paused, like the owner had stepped out for coffee and never came back. And as their eyes adjusted to the dim warehouse lighting, the true scale of what he had built began to sink in. Rare European track weapons, American muscle, legendary Japanese imports. But here's the part that hit hardest. This wasn't a celebrity collecting trophies. This was obsession, passion, precision. And the deeper they walked into that warehouse, the clearer it became. They hadn't just opened a garage. They had opened a hidden chapter of his life. The deeper they stepped into the warehouse, the rarer the machines became. This wasn't just a random mix of expensive cars. It was curated, intentional, almost surgical in its precision. Parked along one wall were multiple BMW E36 M3 lightweights, one of the rarest American-spec BMWs ever produced. Fewer than 130 were originally built for the US market, and reports confirm that Paul Walker owned 5 of them. 5. Most collectors spend years hunting down just one. Each sat slightly different mileage, subtle mechanical tweaks. These weren't duplicates, they were variations of a theme, like he was studying evolution in real time. Then came the Japanese icons. Nissan Skyline GTRs, including the legendary R34 generation, machines that weren't originally legal for US roads when new. The same model that cemented his image in the Fast and the Furious franchise. But these weren't movie props. They were authentic performance cars, some imported through complex compliance channels that only serious enthusiasts would even attempt to navigate. And tucked nearby, a Toyota Supra, not flashy, not wrapped for attention, just clean, purposeful, ready. The collection told a story. He wasn't chasing price tags. He was chasing engineering, balance, weight distribution, turbo response, chassis rigidity. Every car represented a different philosophy of speed. German precision, Japanese innovation, American raw power. But the more impressive the lineup became, the more one question lingered in the air. How much of this was personal, and how much of it was tied to something bigger? At first, it looked simple. Inventory the cars, transfer ownership, move forward. But within days, the paperwork told a different story. Many of the vehicles inside that warehouse weren't registered directly to Paul Walker at all. Instead, titles traced back to Always Evolving, the performance shop and racing business he co-founded with Roger Rodas. And that changed everything. Always Evolving wasn't just a hobby garage. It was a legitimate motorsports operation. Some cars were personal, others were business assets. A few appeared to blur the line between both. After both men tragically passed in 2013, untangling what belonged to whom became complicated. Fast. Vehicles that many assumed were part of Paul's private estate were technically tied to a corporate structure. That meant legal review, asset evaluations, questions about shared ownership. And in situations like that, clarity isn't instant, it's negotiated. Reports in the years that followed confirmed disputes tied to business interests and financial claims. What should have been a quiet closing chapter became layered with filings and back-and-forth discussions behind closed doors. Then, in 2020, 21 of the vehicles crossed the auction block at Barrett-Jackson, bringing in more than $2 million. Headlines focused on the dollar amount. But money wasn't the real tension, because as attorneys sorted through titles and signatures, something else began surfacing inside the cars themselves, and it had nothing to do with ownership. The paperwork was complicated, but what they found inside the cars, that was personal. As the vehicles were inspected and cataloged, small discoveries started appearing in the most unexpected places. Folded pieces of paper tucked into glove boxes, notes slid into owners' manuals, handwritten reminders resting inside center consoles. They were all in the handwriting of Paul Walker. These weren't flashy quotes or dramatic confessions. They were technical, detailed, obsessive in the best way. Tire pressure preferences for specific road conditions, suspension tweaks for tighter corner entry, notes about how a car felt at higher RPMs, observations about weight transfer under braking. He wasn't collecting cars, he was studying them. Some notes read like quick data logs, others were almost reflective. Short lines about how a particular skyline felt on an open stretch of road at night. Raw, honest, written with no audience in mind. And then there was one that hit differently. Inside one of the Nissan GTRs, a short handwritten message referenced his daughter, Meadow. It wasn't written for headlines. It wasn't staged. It was quiet, private. The kind of note you leave when you assume you'll be there one day to explain it yourself. But that day never came. When that message was discovered, the atmosphere in the room shifted. Because suddenly, this wasn't about rare imports or auction values. It was about a father who believed he had more time. And that realization changed everything. Not every car in the warehouse was pristine. Some were taken apart, and that's what made it even more powerful. In one corner sat a Datsun 240Z mid-restoration. The interior had been stripped, panels carefully removed. The engine bay looked prepped for a swap that hadn't happened yet. Parts were labeled with tape, bolts organized into small containers. Nothing messy, nothing careless. It wasn't abandoned, it was paused. Nearby, a classic American muscle car sat with masking tape stretched across the dashboard. Written on it was a to-do list in neat handwriting. Small upgrades, wiring fixes, alignment tweaks. A few tasks were crossed off, others still waiting. Underneath the steering column, a partially connected wiring harness hung frozen in time. Friends had long said that Paul Walker didn't just write checks for builds, he got his hands dirty. He'd disappear into the shop for hours, phone off, focused completely on the work. Acting made him famous, but building made him calm. Walking past those unfinished projects felt different than seeing the rare BMWs or Skylines. Those were completed statements. These were conversations that had been cut short. You could almost picture him coming back the next weekend to finish the wiring, to test fit the engine, to take that first drive around the block. But the tools were still there, and they've been waiting ever since. And just when you think the story couldn't get more layered, another discovery shifts the perspective again. Just when it seemed like the garage was only about speed and obsession, another detail changed the entire tone. Several vehicles had small markings on their dashboards, sticky notes, abbreviations, event ideas scribbled in the margins of notebooks. At first, they didn't make much sense until someone connected the initials. They pointed back to Reach Out Worldwide, the disaster relief nonprofit Paul Walker founded in 2010. And suddenly, the cars meant something bigger. Paul wasn't the type to just write a check and disappear. After the 2010 Haiti earthquake, he personally traveled there to assist with relief efforts. When a massive typhoon devastated parts of the Philippines in 2013, he showed up again. Quietly, without press conferences or staged photos, he helped move supplies, organized volunteers, worked alongside locals. Now it appeared that some of the cars in his garage weren't just passion projects, they were potential fundraisers, auction concepts, gala ideas, handwritten estimates of what certain vehicles might raise for future missions. One modified performance car had notes outlining a charity event timeline. Another had a projected auction value scribbled beside it. These plans were active. They weren't memorial tributes created after his passing. They were in motion before it. That realization hit hard, because it meant the garage wasn't just about horsepower or rarity, it was fuel for something larger. And the future he had mapped out for those cars was never fully realized. In the years that followed, the warehouse slowly emptied. Some of the cars were sold. In 2020, 21 vehicles from the collection crossed the auction block at Barrett-Jackson, bringing in more than $2 million. Headlines focused on the numbers: rare BMWs, coveted imports, bidding wars. To the outside world, it looked like the final chapter. But it wasn't that simple. Not every car was sold publicly. Some were kept within the family. Others were handled privately, away from cameras and crowded auction floors. Certain builds reportedly remained untouched for years, preserved exactly as Paul Walker left them. The legal complications eventually settled. The inventory was resolved. Titles transferred, assets divided. On paper, the story closed. But culturally, it only grew. Collectors still talk about the 5 M3 lightweights. Enthusiasts still debate which Skyline was his most iconic. Car forums still analyze photos from that warehouse, searching for details they may have missed. Because the garage became more than storage space. It became proof. Proof that Paul wasn't playing a car lover on screen. He lived it, studied it, built it, protected it. And maybe that's why the image still lingers. Not the auctions, not the headlines, but that quiet industrial building filled with machines waiting patiently under dim lights. A private world few people ever saw. And a reminder that sometimes the most important parts of someone's life aren't the ones on camera. They're the ones behind closed doors. When the doors to Paul Walker's private garage finally opened, no one expected what was waiting inside. It wasn't just a few luxury cars tucked away for storage. It was an entire hidden world. Rows of ultra-rare machines, half-finished builds frozen in time, handwritten notes left behind in glove boxes, and plans that were never meant for the public to see. What started as a routine inventory quickly turned into something far more personal and far more emotional. Because the deeper they looked, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a car collection, it was a life, paused mid-dream,